Well, good evening, everyone. Before we start, I wanted to ask Ram and Lorna, have you been able to get the updated version of Becoming Buddha downloaded?
I still haven't formally tried. I just downloaded a sample. The sample is correct, but because I still have the old one on my Kindle, instead of the buy button there, it still says go back to the library. So
Okay.
I've yet to really try.
All right. Lorna, how about you? Did you?
We've done it. The last email that you sent me about calling into them or whatever, actually when I received that from you, we'd already contacted Kindle in the help box and said we were trying to upload or whatever. What's it
Download.
Download the new edition one.
Yep.
Revision.
Well, the revision edition, yeah. And they wrote back and said they've already placed the new edition in the cloud for me. I need to upload my old edition and download the new edition which they have placed for me from the cloud, and it worked.
Okay.
It originally started with contacting Kindle in the help box and put in a little question.
Yep.
We're having difficulty uploading or downloading.
Download. So you're certain you have the correct version?
I've got Moira on the credits.
To Moira for being Moira?
Yes.
Okay, that's the. All right. The reason why I say that is I wanted to get it broadcasted also because other people are having difficulties. But if you are, the best thing to do is to just call Amazon directly and let them do it. For some reason, for most people, it's not just a simple download the newest version. I don't know why. They haven't been able to explain it to me either, but the correct file is up there now. So.
They apologize.
Well, they should. Yeah, again, the best thing, it took me a while, but when I called them, they were able to send it and put it on my Kindle too. So, but they couldn't explain why it wasn't available. Sorry for that. A little bit of business. Tonight's talk is on the Assuttava Sutta, which is a very interesting and fairly short sutta, where the Buddha includes a teaching on dependent origination and five clinging aggregates, but to explain the difficulty in, or to say that it's easier to let go of clinging to the physical form as self-identification as it is to identifying with our thoughts. And hopefully I make that clear in explaining the sutta. But it's a very interesting and useful sutta in that way. It's really the way we think and becoming enamored with our own thoughts that creates the biggest problem to letting go of wrong views rooted in ignorance. But we'll meditate first. So find your relaxed meditative posture. Gently close your eyes and gently close your mouth. And holding your back straight but not stiff. Your ears aligned with your shoulders, nose aligned with your navel. And holding yourself very loosely, very gently, very lovingly. Allow yourselves to settle into this room, seats, settle into your bodies, and settle into your minds. A moment to become aware of the sensation of breathing in your body. Just get a feel for what that's like. To be mindful of your breath in your body. And while remaining mindful of your breath in your body, notice that thoughts are flowing. We're conscious beings. Thoughts should be flowing. Meditation is to not be distracted by your own thoughts. So when you find that you're caught up in your thinking again, simply acknowledge that and return your mindfulness to the sensation of breathing. Relaxing your thoughts, mindful of your breathing. And we'll meditate for 20 minutes with callbacks every 5 minutes. Relaxing thoughts, remaining mindful of your breathing. Relaxing thoughts, remaining mindful of your breathing. Relaxing thoughts, remaining mindful of your breathing. Persistent thought or feeling arises. Stay with it for a moment or two. Recognize it as impermanent, and return your mindfulness to the sensation of breathing. And we'll meditate for 5 more minutes. Take a moment to notice the quality of your mind. Be at peace with your mind. And when you're ready, you can gently open your eyes. Welcome, Vicky.
Hi, thank you.
Glad you made it. Sir, what's your name?
Antonio.
Antonio, welcome to our Sangha.
Thank you.
Do you have an understanding of the Buddhist teachings? Four Noble Truths, Eightfold Path, etc.?
Kind of new to this. Yeah, I drove it down,
And you figured you'd come up
I tried to tell
and...
him a little bit, but
Good, okay.
I'm not to tell him.
The only reason I ask, you're welcome. I'm glad you came tonight, both of you. The only reason I ask is I'm going to give a talk that will be a little bit out of context simply because you don't have that background. But just briefly, the Buddha taught his very first teaching. Buddha was an awakened human being, meaning that he developed an understanding of the nature of human life. His very first teaching, he taught something called Four Noble Truths. For the rest of his life, 45 years, he taught in the context of those Four Noble Truths. The only reason I say that is just to reiterate that point. Everything he taught was to develop understanding of these four truths. There's a lot of information on my website, and Vicky will continue to fill you in. Every class, I teach something that the Buddha taught in relation to those Four Noble Truths. The meditation method we just use is a meditation method that he taught, and there's instructions on my website, becoming-buddha.com, and a recording of that. Just keep that in mind with the talk that I'm going to give today. Some key concepts that the Buddha taught was something called dependent origination, which states that from ignorance of those Four Noble Truths, we create a lot of confusion, deluded thinking, and suffering in our lives. And the description that he used is called the Five Clinging Aggregates, description of that personal experience of the suffering. And that should be enough experience so your head doesn't spin by the time you're done. The Assuttava Sutta. The real interesting thing to me about this is the distinction the Buddha makes between clinging to the body as self-identification, as opposed to clinging to the thoughts that we become so enamored with that are all rooted in that initial ignorance. The Buddha awakened to the profound understanding that it is ignorance of Four Noble Truths, that confusion, deluded thinking, and ongoing unsatisfactory experiences are dependent on for origination. I put those words in to tie into dependent origination. The Assuttava Sutta is another simple and direct sutta on dependent origination that also references the Five Clinging Aggregates. It is interesting, particularly because the Buddha addresses ongoing thinking rooted in ignorance as being more difficult in recognizing the I-making in that or the conceit than identification with the physical form or the body. What this shows in a somewhat subtle fashion is the way that Dhamma practice develops gradually from wrong view to a profound right view within the framework of the Eightfold Path. This way of presenting the Dhamma avoids the relative and absolute debate, which is something the Buddha always was very mindful of, to not getting into this idea of relative reality or absolute reality. He just simply didn't address it. No, that's not true. When the question came up, he said avoid it. Debate that leads to the mistaken wrong view of a non-dual reality. An understanding of the Buddhist teachings on the three marks of existence within the proper context of dependent origination shows that all things, including awakening or developing full human maturity, is an ongoing process. If that process is rooted in the framework of the Eightfold Path, awakening is the end result. If the process is rooted in continued ignorance of Four Noble Truths, then only continued ignorance can follow. The Assuttava Sutta. Does anybody have any questions about what I just said? Of non-duality. I don't want to get into a long discussion of it, but Frank brought it up when he came here. most of modern Buddhism is rooted in the idea of a non-dual Dharma and a non-dual existence. It's not something that the Buddha taught. In fact, he taught something that contradicts what the Buddha taught. But the implication isn't that there's either a non-dual or a dual existence, because duality doesn't explain the nature of reality either. What the Buddha taught is to see everything that arises in its discrete form without clinging to it in any way. So if you can look at the notion of the development of a non-dual doctrine, that's rooted in the idea that we cling ourselves to everything. We are one thing, and we're all interconnected and interbe, and we're interdependent on each other. And in some relatively practical ways, we are, but those relatively practical ways have no relation to the Buddha's Dhamma. It's like creating a doctrine over saying that most oranges have orange skin. It's true. You can't refute that. But it has no bearing on the Dhamma. So there's some things that we can claim there's non-duality about them. We're connected. Carl Sagan used to always say, we all come from star stuff. We do. There's elements of every star in us. So you can say we are connected to the whole universe. True enough, but it has nothing to do with the Dhamma. In that we can create self-referential identities very easy through that idea of non-duality. It becomes very confusing. The Bodhisattva ideal is dependent on a non-dual doctrine. The Buddha was at Savatthi in Jita's Grove, Anathapindika's monastery. There he had addressed the assembled monks and nuns. Friends, an uninstructed ordinary person might grow disenchanted with their body, composed of the four great elements. They might grow dispassionate toward their body and gain release from clinging to it. How does this occur? Due to aging and decline, the impermanence of their body, again composed of the four great elements, becomes apparent. In this way, the uninstructed ordinary person might grow disenchanted with their body and gain release from clinging to physical form. Why would you want to continue to cling to this when it's so prone to suffering? I'm going to skip a little bit there. All things in the phenomenal world are made up of those four elements, and those four elements are subject to constant change, the four elements of fire, wind, water, and earth. Thank you. The Buddha continues, but what is often called mind, intellect, or consciousness, the uninstructed ordinary person is unable to develop disenchantment or develop dispassion towards thinking, that thinking rooted in ignorance of Four Noble Truths, and gain release from it. How does this occur? Once ignorance arises, the mind, intellect, or consciousness is relished, revered, grasped after, and clung to by the uninstructed ordinary person. This mind rooted in ignorance as, this is me, this is myself, this is what I am. From this self-referential view, it is impossible to grow disenchanted or dispassionate towards the mind or gain release from clinging to it. Pretty profound words that the Buddha states there. Clinging to these views that we have, ongoing clinging, prevents awakening, and it only continues ignorance. But once these views are created, remember the second link in dependent origination, from ignorance, mental fabrications are formed. Mental fabrications are assumptions we make about ourselves in relation to the world, rooted in ignorance. Once they're formed, you cannot just recognize them, at least most people can't recognize them and let them go. We talked about this recently a lot. How does a deluded person know that they're deluded? You can't unless you have a framework for recognizing that delusion. These are my words. A mind rooted in ignorance is conditioned to ignore anything that would challenge this initial ignorance. This is why all the attempts to adapt or accommodate the Buddha's original teachings to fit individual or culturally influenced views invariably results in a Buddhist practice that contradicts or ignores the Buddha's direct teachings. There's an article on the website about that called Modern Buddhism, A Thicket of Views. And it's really interesting how views that are often vehemently and sometimes angrily defended, when you look at them closely, they're all simply rooted in ignorance. And the arguments made to continue them are simply arguments made to continue to ignore the ignorance of thinking, which is something the Buddha described in his awakening, that feedback loop of self-referential views stuck in that wrong view of thinking, meaning consciousness rooted in ignorance. Just goes on and on and on. The Buddha continues. It would be more skillful for the uninstructed ordinary person to cling to their body more so than the mind as the self. Why is this? Because the body composed of the four elements is seen as impermanent and prone to decay. What is identified as mind or intellect or consciousness is seen as one thing that continues to attach to another thing, meaning constantly changing self-referential views, resulting in confused views such as interdependence, interconnectedness, and interbeing, such as a dualistic view. Everybody see that? How the view creates the wrong views, ignorant views. The mind creates strategies to continue those views rather than recognizing the ignorance in those views, rather than recognizing the suffering that arises, the confusion that arises. And even in the face of obvious confusion, deluded thinking, and ongoing unsatisfactory experiences, that mind will cling tenaciously to those ignorant views, doesn't it?
We're living them.
Well, that's right. And the Buddha recognized this. This is really what he awakened to. And he recognized this 2,600 years ago without any real reference except a well-concentrated mind and knowing what it wasn't. And the reason why I say that is he studied the great spiritual disciplines of his time and realized those just contributed to this feedback loop of his own confusion and deluded thinking. He realized upon his awakening that it was the tendency of a mind rooted in ignorance to continue to ignore anything that would challenge that ignorance. That's why he developed an Eightfold Path. That's why he taught eventually dependent origination, to bring to mind that idea of ignorance. Diane, a couple of weeks ago, asked for clarity on ignorance. And it does take some clarity, but only because our minds want to ignore it. In a few weeks, I'll be teaching a series of talks on the connection between ignorance and dukkha, and using about 5 or 6 different suttas to do that. The Buddha continues. This is a great metaphor. Just as a monkey swinging through the forest grabs one branch after another, in the same way, what is seen as mind, intellect, or consciousness constantly grasp after one thing after another. And every thought that we grab onto, the swinging monkey, is used to continue to establish that ignorant view. Every thought that an ignorant mind has is a self-referential view used to continue to establish itself. Every single view. That's why our minds get to the point where we feel like we have that monkey mind. It's constantly going, constantly churning, constantly seeking to establish itself. And when things get more stressful, that mind usually gets even more busy and continuing to establish itself. It's one of the reasons why the Buddha taught meditation to deepen concentration, so that we interrupt that monkey mind, that grasping, swinging from one thought to the next thought to the next thought. This is me, this is me, this is me. Creating some consciousness so we stop grasping after those ideas. Because it's at that point where we need to most practice restraint. At that point of establishing ourselves through one thought after the next thought, after the next thought, clinging one thought to the next thought. Frank.
What about the people in your life that they don't do that? They don't study the Dhamma, and they don't meditate, and they're just completely calm and peaceful, and they don't swing from thought to thought and establishing ego. I have a few people in my life that are like that.
Yeah, they are fortunate, aren't they?
Very calm. I call them the Buddha.
Yeah. Yeah.
They're like, I'm like, you don't meditate? So, I mean, I've done it for a long time.
Yeah.
There's peaceful people.
Yeah. There are. Of course, we don't know what's going on internally, but the external presentation. I've met people like that too.
I only find it in my cats.
Yeah. What was important to me to recognize that it wasn't me.
No, right. I mean,
Yeah.
That's it. I'm like, I don't get it.
I don't get it either. And comparing ourselves to anybody else can also start creating a more confused view because of that. I think it was a couple of weeks ago I talked about, the using that word why as a self-referential frame of reference. Why, just like that. Again, I'm stretching what you're talking about a little bit just to make a point. Why is a person like that, and why am I not like that? And how does that occur? Or even to say, why do I have to meditate to maintain a calm and peaceful mind? I don't know, but I know that I do. And I'm glad I found a framework to develop an understanding of confused and ill at ease a lot of times. Thank you for bringing that up. The Buddha continues. The well-instructed disciple of the Dhamma attends mindfully and appropriately to dependent origination. Now, first he gives a brief explanation of what that is. When this is, that is. And this one line has been used as that idea of non-duality. When one thing arises, another thing follows. The Buddha, remember, the Buddha speaking in context of the Four Noble Truths and dependent origination. What he's saying here, when ignorance arises, then suffering follows. When ignorance arises, there is dukkha. From the arising of ignorance, using the Buddha's words, from the arising of this comes the arising of that. From the arising of ignorance comes the arising of suffering. When ignorance ceases, suffering ceases. The translation is when this isn't, that isn't. When the cessation of ignorance comes, the cessation of suffering comes. From the cessation of this comes the cessation of that. I'm going to skip a little bit. The Buddha continues. In other words, from ignorance as a requisite condition, fabrications or assumptions. From fabrications as a requisite condition comes consciousness. Now remember that consciousness is rooted in mental fabrications or assumptions that themselves are rooted in ignorance. From the consciousness as a requisite condition comes name and form. Name and form, nama rupa in Pali, simply means I'm now identifying myself as this form informed by that consciousness rooted in ignorance. Name and form is self-identification.
Can you say that again, John?
I'll go back that one. And from consciousness as a requisite condition comes name and form. And name, the Pali is nama rupa. It simply means that we are putting a name to the form, creating an identity. This is John. This is me. This is who I am. And that form is informed by that ongoing thinking rooted in ignorance.
So that's what Lorna talks about when she says telling stories. So we create stories.
Yes, and that's exactly it. And remember, the stories are rooted in those fabrications rooted in ignorance. So the stories themselves, even though this is really what the Buddha is referring to here, that these thoughts that we make, these stories that we tell, are almost impossible to let go of. Why? Because it's the story we think we are. It's all we think we are. We've talked a lot about when people start of the Dhamma, the first thing they usually go to is, this sounds like annihilation. What happens to me when I let go of the story? What happens? You're no longer living a fairy tale. You're living in reality. That's the point of the whole explanation of dependent origination. Did I answer the question? Yeah. From name and form as a requisite condition comes the sixth sense base. The sixth sense base is our five physical senses and that sixth sense of ongoing consciousness. From the sixth sense base as a requisite condition comes contact. Notice the using of the word requisite. This whole process requires each step in the process, and it is itself requiring ignorance. This idea of contact is pointing to the solution. You remember we've been talking a lot in the last 2 months, beginning with a series of talks on restraint, on developing restraint at the point of contact, at the point that we start creating new stories about ourselves. And that new story could be as simply as something new comes in our life and we decide we like it or we don't like it. That's adding to the story of who I am. If at that point we can practice restraint and maintain a well-concentrated and peaceful mind, we'll begin the process of awakening, turning away from those assumptions rooted in ignorance. Is that clear? Somewhat? Okay. From contact as a requisite condition comes feeling. Of course, we first have to have contact in some way through our senses to feel anything. And feeling in this sense is any movement or disturbance in the mind. It's not just a physical feeling, and it's not a judgment attached to a feeling, meaning an emotion. It's any disturbance in the mind at this point. The same idea of feeling in the 4 foundations of mindfulness.
This is where the mind moves either towards or away from that thing that it contacts.
Yes,
Either more or less.
Yes, it's at this point that we mental fabrications, these assumptions at that point of contact. One of the reasons why this relates to this whole, this talk relates to the whole idea of a non-dualistic is dependent origination has, and this began later on in the formation of a book called the Abhidhamma, which is a very mystical and multi-layered view at the Buddhist teaching. This book was created at least 200 years after the Buddhist teachings, used to justify some of the thinking that was being developed. And in the Abhidhamma, and then subsequently, origination is not presented clearly in this way. Dependent origination is used then as a creation myth, and it's greatly altered, but still called dependent origination, to describe the creation of all things in the universe. The Buddha used dependent origination not as a creation myth, the creation of mental fabrications rooted in ignorance and their consequence. It has nothing to do with the arising of a physical form in the physical world. It has nothing at all to do with it. Again, it's related as much to physical birth as anything foolish, including saying there's a non-dualistic reality. It has nothing to do with it. From feelings as a requisite condition comes craving. Is any type of desire rooted in that ignorance. So something has contacted my senses. I've had a reaction to it, a feeling. I've decided I like it. I want more of it. Or I decided I don't like it, what has just occurred. And I decide I don't want more of that. That's still craving. It's just aversion, 2 sides of the same coin, right? It's all craving. From craving as a requisite condition comes clinging and maintaining. Once I've decided what I like and what I don't like, talking about these mental fabrications in this whole thought process, once I've decided what I like and what I don't like, and I've self-identified, I'm saying this is what I need to be happy, I'm now stuck with those views. And I will cling to those views and do everything I can, including ignoring the suffering they may bring, in order to maintain those views. And we do that all the time, don't we? We've all, at least at one point in our lives, engaged in behavior that we knew wasn't entirely beneficial to us, yet we did it anyway, because we were choosing to ignore what was obvious. Excuse me. Is that point clear? Because that's kind of important. The most extreme examples, and I'm fortunate enough to have lived it, is addiction and those types of compulsive behavior. I'm joking when I'm saying there's nothing fortunate about being an addict, except it certainly gives you a view of what extreme clinging is about, doesn't it? But we all do that. We all have different levels that we cling to things and insist that we need these things to be happy. Remember when the Buddha described dukkha, described suffering. Birth is suffering, sickness is suffering, aging is suffering, death is suffering, not getting what we want is suffering. We've all had those experiences. I'm not getting what I want. I'm not getting what I need. Sometimes we blame other people. We blame our upbringing. We blame our environment. We blame everybody for not getting what we want. And then he said getting what we don't want is suffering. And we've all done that. We blame other people for not getting what we want, or blame the society, the environment, the government, other people, our loved ones. When the fact is, it's nobody's fault. It's just a consequence of living in the world. We're always going to have times when we get what we want. We're always going to have times when we get what we don't want. It's part of dukkha. When we let go of the view that we created this story about what we need to be happy, let go of the story about what we need to be happy, I emphasize that on reason, for a purpose, then we're simply happy. Because the story doesn't have to be maintained. Clinging and maintaining. Lauren, you had your hand up.
Isn't the truth that we're all addicts?
Yes, I mean, I would,
It's
yes.
just a degree.
It is just a degree. What the Buddha is describing here and in all of his teachings is addiction on some often subtle levels, but we don't recognize it. Again, clinging is just, addiction is just another word for clinging. You know, and the ongoing process of maintaining that addiction is maintaining clinging, maintaining craving. What fuels all addiction? Craving. And once we have that, and I think anybody can identify this, we get something that we feel we need to be happy, or we just want to give ourselves something to be happy. We think it'll make us feel good. And again, in the great broad sense, there's nothing wrong with that or right with it. It's just what it is. But it can lead to something unskillful, disappointment.
So isn't it, it's not, to use your prime example, it's not bad to want a piece of cake.
Never.
It's, especially if it's chocolate. But to depend on that, to need that, to be distracted
all that,
by
yes.
it.
That's what and if I don't get that chocolate cake, I'm not happy. You know? And that is a way of being addicted to that chocolate cake, isn't it? It's not addiction in the usual sense that we look at it, but it is. It's still
control over you.
Yep, it's attachment, it's clinging, and it's also, and the ongoing thought is that aspect of maintaining that clinging view. And if you think about that, it's silly to become, what's the right word? It's not distraction. Yeah, I'll use it. It's silly to become distracted by the piece of chocolate cake I'm getting tonight, isn't it? But yet I'll ignore the silliness of it, even occupying my thoughts. Why do I need to even think about it? I'll ignore the silliness of that. It's rooted in ignorance. Lorna, you had another question?
No, I have my hand up.
I didn't actually know.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I was just going to mention about the attachment thing. It's like that self-identity through the attachment. You know, you can't be happy without it, or you need it to sustain a certain level of peace in your mind, my mind. And it happens with everything.
Yep.
Really, for me every day. Even like now with meditation and studying the Dhamma. But I mean, this is like a skillful, great effort to, you know, it's where I get my peace of mind. So my wife says, like, well, you're attached to meditating, and you're attached to going to the center, and you're attached to reading about the Dhamma. And in a way, she's right. But it's more like the skillful, right effort, right action,
yeah. Because
I am getting a lot of relief from the struggle and the negative side effects of being attached to the wrong thing, wrong view, you know. And so it's like with that right view and the right action and keeping right intention. I mean, everything happens for me with right intention.
Yeah, well, that is. That's the foundation. Right intention is the foundation of keeping ourselves focused. That there's a word, chanda, C-H-A-N-D-A, which also happens to be the horse that the Buddha rode out of his palace with no relation. Chanda means skillful desire, and there's nothing wrong with it. In fact, we need it. We need it to keep ourselves focused in the right way. You know, so you can call meditating twice a day or coming here being attached to it. But why do you have to put a negative connotation? It's our attachments to things rooted in ignorance that cause us difficulty. There's no attachment rooted in ignorance. In fact, it's attachment rooted in wisdom that gets us inclined in the right way. You know. So, any other questions? Yes, Lorna.
Is there a point in dependent origination, and I think where Ron mentioned leaning forward or leaning away from something? Is that the point where anatta establishes itself? Is there like a link, and then you can see where anatta is established, and then from there on, it's your thinking.
I'm sorry. It's a great question. You could say that anatta is established in ignorance, in that first link from ignorance to assumptions. The arising of anatta, I guess you would say, is at that point of contact.
So the
But-
personal experience of anatta.
Yes, but I think we there. I don't know that there's a lot of value in pointing that out, because what's most important is to recognize from ignorance, and I'll finish the dependent origination, from ignorance through those 12 links, results in dukkha. Excuse me. First noble truth is, to put it simply, dukkha occurs. As remember how the Buddha describes dukkha, in short, the 5 clinging aggregates are dukkha. It's at that point that the Buddha is describing anatta, the not self characteristic. That which, those wrong views, those clinging wrong views that are prone to confusion, delusion, and suffering. And that is the self. The Buddha also said, this is, again, pointing out that this has nothing to do with non-duality, it's not a creation myth. Looking for the point of creation is foolish and itself rooted in ignorance. It's just another distraction. So recognize that anatta is rooted in a process that itself is rooted in ignorance, and it's an ongoing process unless we do something to intervene and change that process from continuing ignorance to developing awakening.
And as soon as you recognize the self, you can disconnect the entire cycle of dependent origination.
Yes. At any point, you can break one of these links in the chain. That's why it's presented that way, and the whole chain falls apart. So you don't have to, it doesn't have to be one thing or the other. If you can recognize that your assumptions are rooted in ignorance, everything that follows falls apart. You can practice restraint at the point of contact and actually achieve that, the whole chain of dependencies falls apart. And in some ways, that's not we can do that as we're developing awakening, and we'll have insights into this whole process, not necessarily leading instantly to awakening, but adding to the process of becoming awakened, hence the name of the book, Becoming Buddha. There's a process in becoming. And now, let me get to that. It's right here.
But can I just,
Sure.
the assumption that the moment of whatever you call it, the questioning, the feeling of a discomfort, of leaning towards, of just recognizing that that moment is a point of whole truth. That's the key.
The opportunity.
But you also just said a word that I can't remember. So the question is not, is this a moment of I-making, but assuming it's a moment of I-making. And then from that assumption, you can disrupt the link of the clinging aggregates. So just, if you're just in a situation, you say, well, I'm just going to assume that I'm I-making at this moment, and sort of back out of the situation, you can sort of, if you could slow down time, you can sort of watch the whole thing fall apart.
Yeah, well,
it usually is that.
You can actually slow down time by developing a well-concentrated mind. At least it appears that way. Your mind is supple enough to recognize that process. So, but we don't have to assume that we're I-making. If there's a disturbance in our mind, we know that we're I-making. And again, as we develop the framework of the Eightfold Path, we see this more and more clearly. That's the whole reason why the Buddha taught an Eightfold Path, to develop a well-concentrated mind supporting the refined mindfulness, so that we can see the I-making that we're always engaged in. And that leads to the whole point of becoming. What am I going to become? Any other questions? It was really a great point. Vicky.
Sorry, I did have another question going back to this story.
Please.
I understand the concept, But what happens when there is some real truth to your story? And does that still just make it a story, or how you interpret it?
Really, yes to both of those. It's still a story, even though there's some truth underlying the story. In other words, I'll just use trauma. Something awful has happened to me, and that's true. It happened in my life. That conditions my mind in a certain way that now becomes the story. So perhaps, well, not perhaps, people that have had traumatic events in their lives, the difficulty arises not from the event, but from the ongoing story created in the conditioned mind itself. And this is one of the areas where therapy can be very helpful. I don't think I've ever implied that the Eightfold Path will solve everybody's problem. Sometimes it takes a professional way of looking at these things to start the process of unraveling deep trauma. And then the view that's developed that creates an impersonal, dispassionate way of looking at these things can provide the final healing. Because when we realize that no matter how awful, and every one of us, I mean, I could sit down and get you crying about all the awful things that happened to me. And I'm not diminishing them either, but I see them much more realistically now. They're part of having a human life. And if I was going to have a human life, this thing, that thing, all these things had to happen. Not because they needed to be imposed on me, not because of karma. They had to happen because they did happen. That I took very personal for many, many years until I realized there was nothing personal about them, even though some of them might have even been directed at me. That had nothing to do with me. It had to do with the other person or the situation at hand. I could start taking a more impersonal life when I started taking myself out of the equation. Of a lot of stuff that I carried around with me for many years. And that's one of the things that the Buddha recognized, and he talks about it and describes it in the Nagara Sutta. You would think that a human being brought up the prince in his father's kingdom and given everything that he ever wanted. But that was a lot of baggage to the Buddha because he saw that. He described it as a confining space. He saw it as a prison. Even that wonderful life from the outside was very traumatic to this human being. So I went a little bit past what I think you were asking.
Right, yes, that clears it. Thank you.
Thank you for asking. Any other questions about this before we go on? All right, let me get to the becoming part in dependent origination. I'll go back one. From craving as a requisite condition comes clinging and maintaining. From clinging and maintaining as a requisite condition comes becoming. That word again, we had such a good time with this on our last retreat, and we will again on this one. What does the Buddha mean by becoming, and why doesn't he put a qualifier after it? Things that has allowed for a lot of what we might become. Suttas, those that were on Sutta to what it mean by becoming. In this sense, in the context of dependent origination, the Buddha is describing the ongoing process of becoming ignorant. It doesn't need a qualifier, does it? Because from clinging and maintaining as a requisite condition, it comes becoming more ignorant. I mean, the qualifier is in the context. But it also points out to how we get out of this process. Wise. By ending, wisdom is the antidote to ignorance, isn't it? How do we develop wisdom? The Eightfold Path is characterized as a path of virtue, concentration, and wisdom, developing wisdom. Buddha continues in dependent origination. From that becoming, as a requisite condition comes birth. And this is where the mythology of using dependent origination as a creation myth. Now remember, take it in context. The Buddha is not saying from ignorance comes physical birth. He's talking about what we give birth to in this mind rooted in ignorance, which is another moment rooted in ignorance. And it relates directly back to what was just previously said, becoming more ignorant. So we can only give birth to another moment rooted in ignorance unless we have some other way of looking at this ongoing process of I-making and another way of interrupting this these ongoing views rooted in ignorance. How do we do it? The Buddha continues, from birth as the requisite condition, from giving birth to, again, I'm not discounting future births, but it really has no bearing on this. So giving birth to another ignorant moment. From giving birth to another ignorant moment, that requisite condition comes sickness, aging, death, sorrow, regret, pain, distress, and despair. Such is the origination of the entire mass of confusion, deluded thinking, and suffering. Now, remember, this relates to the Shamatha Sutta. In ignorance, we'll become disturbed by our own birth. Why did this happen to me? How did I get here? What an awful circumstance. We'll get disturbed by the simple process of becoming sick. We'll take that personally. When it's simply a process of having a human life, we can't escape it. We'll become disturbed by aging. I think I'm getting a little bit more of that every day. When it's simply a consequence of having a human life, we become disturbed by the idea of our own death. When we know it's what happened to Bahia, that cow might get us any minute. We become disturbed by not getting what we want. We become disturbed by getting what we don't want. That's the ongoing process of becoming increasingly ignorant because of our reaction to things that are normal worldly causes and conditions. They're a consequence of having a human life. They can't be any different. It relates back to what Vicky just said. What has occurred can't be any different than what has occurred. And if we can take the I-making out of it, stop taking it so damn personally, then our minds will remain at peace. We won't continue to add to the story of our own life. In some cases, because trauma might have happened at an early point in our life, we carry a story of just a miserable life, a traumatic life, from one thought to the next even. And it's understandable, and you can even justify it, except, it's okay to do that. What's important is to recognize we can undo it too. We can stop the internal process of carrying all kinds of stuff around with us. And whether it's traumatic experiences or simply wrong views creating an ongoing unsatisfying life. At any point, we can interrupt the process and end it. And then we can become awakened. What does the Buddha describe as awakened? A calm and peaceful mind. A person who has gained release from clinging and maintaining. There's no more craving for things to be different, any different than it is, including the story of my life. I should stop there, but I'm not. It's kind of a dramatic spot to stop. Pardon me?
I said that's a good place to stop on a good note.
Well, I'm just thinking,
On a high note.
give me just a second to see if we make this a two-parter. What was that? Was that a yes?
No, I didn't say it.
Yeah, we'll conclude this next week. I think there's enough here. It's a good place to stop because now we get into where the Buddha talks about actually undoing, like Liz was saying, undoing the process of dependent origination. So we'll stop here and we'll conclude this next week. Is that good? Okay. Great. I think that's a great executive decision, rooted in great wisdom. Any questions again about what we talked about, and then we'll go around the room. Okay. Ram, good to see you tonight.
Good to see you. As we were talking about all this, I was musing about my frustration at times when I'm trying to explain the Dhamma to somebody who doesn't know it. And I can see something that's just not taking. But I was just thinking, why the hell am I frustrated with that? What's going on there? What's my story there? What am I really clinging to? The fact that I'm supposed to be able to be smart and eloquent enough to get this across. The other day, Anita asked me a question. We were talking about. She brought up soul, at some point in the day, and then just before you're fall asleep, and she takes half an hour to an hour to fall asleep. I'm gone in 2 minutes. So as I'm about to she asked me again about, what does the Buddha say about salt? So here I am trying to, formulate what not self thing is all about. And within literally 60 seconds, I hear this slight snoring.
That's
Wasn't
great.
very effective there. So it was effective in getting you to sleep.
Yeah. I think that using the Dhamma as opposed to Ambien, that's a great thing.
Can you record that?
Maybe that's it. Yeah, I wonder how many people are listening to my Dhamma talks to go to sleep on. I think there's quite an uptick around 10 o'clock. Thank you. Right, good to see you tonight. It's been a while. Where are you here?
Yeah, sorry guys, been
Yeah, we missed you.
busy and on vacation and all kinds of different things, but it's good to be home and see all my friends. Really good class tonight. Please, that was really neat. We think of all of these things, and we always hear, ignorance of Four Noble Truths leads to confusion, delusion, and suffering. I feel like it's ignorant of specifically the second noble truth, that craving for and clinging to ego gratification or a view of self that seeks to establish an ego to gratify is where we lose it. We lose our dispassionate state.
Yeah.
We get into our stories, and we can see this everywhere. Even when you're walking down the street at night, and it's just you, and you see someone across the street a good ways up with a hoodie on. It's dark out. It's raining, maybe it's not. You're walking. Oh, there's that person with the hoodie. Immediately, there's a physiological body sensation that arises. And right after that, I should say, the mind starts to generate a scenario of what is going to happen. As soon as that person steps off the curb and starts walking toward you, this person's going to kill me. This person's going to hurt me. This person, I don't know, who is this person? What are they going to do? What am I going to do? Here they come, here they come, here they come. Holy smokes, I'm like already ready to jump out of my skin here. I'm terrified. Here I haven't stopped walking. I'm still walking. I'm pretending not to.
Pretend you're brave.
Yeah, I'm generating all kinds of stories and scenarios. And there they go. They just keep walking. They're not interested in you or me or anybody. So we just went through this entire psychochemical fabrication.
Right.
You did.
That I did.
Not me.
Nice one. But you know what I mean. You saw the other person. So
I was watching it all happen.
And so the person walks by and we keep going. And now we have to, now we go, oh my God, that was so silly. I didn't really think they were gonna kill me or something, or I was gonna have to kill them. Or, like, whoa, we just go there. So that's the story. That's generating the story. That's generating scenarios. And we do that all the time, all day. I see something through contact that I have a feeling about. Let's say it's anxiety. Boom, anxiety starts to happen. What happens first is there's a sensation that arises somewhere in the body. Then instantly the mind labels it anxiety. Then now we're off in the story. Now we're off in scenarios of associating. The mind is excellent at doing this. Associating every single time that I felt anxious, what happened, how I can make a strategy to avoid ever feeling that again. So now I'm not even here anymore. I'm in my scenario, in the story of how to either push it away, avoid it, or figure it out, solve it. Right, I'm already in wrong speech, I'm already in wrong action, it's all gone. I've completely, I have no dispassionate restraints. I'm in.
The Buddha didn't feel that when Ananda was coming after him with a 100th finger, you know?
Angulamilla.
Angulamilla, right. Yeah, same thing. I mean, so that's something that, where the 4 foundations of mindfulness come into this practice, and sort of the deeper parts of the Satipatthana Sutta in that way, of drop the story, stay with what's happening now. What's happening now is there's a sensation that's arising in the body somewhere, and guess what? Thoughts, feelings, emotions, sensations, they're impermanent. They're arising and passing away on their own all the time. We don't have to generate wild scenarios of getting killed or killing someone just to watch these things come and go. So that's where Ram had mentioned this moving towards or moving away from these things that come up in us. So all of that comes from ignorance of the 4 Noble Truths. Which one? The second Noble Truth. Craving for and clinging to ego gratification of any kind. This person's going to kill me, I'm going to kill this person. There's ego gratification there. Mm-hmm. So that, the speed at which that's happening, continuity obscures impermanence. This is just a sensation that's arising somewhere in the body that's, oh, there it's gone. Oh, there it is again. Now it's gone. So these things we don't have to grab onto or push away. They'll go on their own as long as we can hang out dispassionately and observe it. Whether it's something awful or terrible, or just something mundane.
Or something really, really good.
Yeah.
Right.
I mean,
Just as much of a trap.
A nice person of the opposite gender coming towards you.
Yeah.
And you go, whoa. You know, part of your head is doing that. And you've already, I've already dropped, 40 years of my age. Instantly. Because now I'm 15.
And we have free will, right? And
Yeah.
it's free will.
And the marriage never happened.
Because you're not going to break it.
This is why it takes you so long to fall asleep.
Yeah, it's interesting to see how this and how quickly it happens. And I'm also starting to see how completely automatic it is.
Exactly.
It's stuff that actually it's from our genetic background that just
Oh yeah.
right up.
But there's free will.
Instantly.
There's conditioned thinking here. Because of that, you need to recognize and drop the story the Buddha taught an Eightfold Path, because it's not enough. In fact, most of us can't even recognize. We think the story is so real. There's no reason to even question it until we start questioning it, and then we see it. That point of contact, the second noble truth, recognizing, craving, and clinging, is what Frank mentioned too. That's the right intention. Is the intention, the strong resolve to recognize in this moment, to practice restraint, to recognize craving and clinging as it arises. And also notice the arising and falling away of it, because then you'll recognize it's like foam on the ocean. There's nothing there. But what a great description of how we create stories in our minds. You know, somebody's coming. And we'll do it whether it's just one person on the other side of the street or we're in a huge crowd.
Yeah.
We're always worried. We've got a little spinach in my tooth. He said, I hope not. What will they think of me if they see it? What difference does it make? We're just living our lives. Thank you. Good to see you tonight.
Well, that's going to be hard to follow. So I'm thinking of getting a tattoo on the palm of my hand that says, close the book before I smack the because I love stories. In my real life, I love stories, but I am getting more and more aware of not, doing these fabrications that create false scenarios.
Yeah.
So I guess I'm gaining some wisdom.
Sounds like it.
Yeah, but when you were talking, I was thinking about the Bodhisattva Hans Christian Andersen and the Emperor's New Clothes. I think that was one of his stories, and how we are watching that all play out in a very dramatic and global way.
Yeah.
And boy, I sure hope somebody can make it stop. We need to stop that story.
Yeah. We'll see. Thank you.
Thank you, John.
Mary, good to see you tonight.
Well, it's good to be here. And how are you?
I'm good, thank you. Hey, where's Isabel tonight?
Yeah, I know. Where is she? This is really great. There's a lot to think about. I'm going to need to listen to this again. There's a lot that's really resonating with me. But I think that's all I have to say. So thank you.
Thank you. I'll have the talk up later tonight or tomorrow. Judy, good to see you.
Good to be here, everybody. It's always good to hear this again. It's always a stretch for my mind to follow, to grasp, try to grasp. So I thank you for doing this again. And just a little thing that I've noticed in myself since I've been coming here and talking about restraint and the eye-making thing is, and I don't even know in particular, but I will be with people or something and talk will be happening and I think of something, or I don't know, something will come into my mind that I could interject, and then I realize that why would I do that? Because it really adds nothing. It's just except maybe a little self-aggrandizement or something. And so I'm like, well, I don't need to do that.
That's right.
And so, and I think, okay, no. So I've begun to recognize, where that happens or can happen. And before I would be like, and now I'm just a little, just every once in a while it happens, but it's just something that I've noticed.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you for isn't that wonderful to be able to recognize that and actually do it? And your mind is much more at peace.
Mm-hmm.
And it's
and then it becomes easier.
Yeah.
To not do that.
It's so important to recognize that it's actually happening.
Mm-hmm.
And that's no small thing. I mean, that is practicing restraint at the point of eye making. Thank you. Andrew, how's your restraint compared to Judy's? It's good to see you.
I've just a question about how you would interpret dependent origination using other words. It's a term I've heard so many times, and yet I don't understand it as readily as hearing somebody say, "Oh, dinner's at 8."
Take it away, John.
Well, that idea that of dinner at 8 is going to cause great suffering because you're assuming it's dinner at 8. It's at 9. So missing dinner has a required condition of. It's what a great question. I don't know that I could use clear words or terms.
Well, actually, what the Buddha says, this leads to that.
Well, yeah.
Is in a way the translation.
This leads to that.
This leads to that.
Yeah.
Well, that's
Suffering.
That's the pattern, John.
Ignorance leads to suffering. You know, and that really is. I mean, that's enough to understand the whole process. If you're but you have to hold open the question: ignorance of what? Ignorance of Four Noble Truths leads to suffering. That's dependent origination. If you read the links or what I just read tonight, the foundation is ignorance. It concludes with the whole mass of suffering. 12 links later. So ignorance of Four Noble Truths leads to suffering. Yeah. And what is dukkha? Remember that part of the problem is when we don't know. It took me a long time to grasp dependent origination, but now it seems like the most obvious thing in the world to me. Same thing with the Eightfold Path. We want that aspect of ignorance. There's this veil that comes over of things that would challenge our ignorance, and it's just so hard to see something even though it's obvious. That description of 5 clinging aggregates. That's so hard for many people to grasp when all it is a description of the personal experience of suffering. So another way of saying that whole process is ignorance of Four Noble Truths leads to suffering. How do you end that ignorance? Develop understanding of the Four Noble Truths. How do we do that? The Eightfold Path. It's all included in that one saying. So I hope that helps.
Well.
That's beautiful.
The refuge of the Sangha.
Thank you. You will. You know, you are a stream enterer. Just stay in the stream. Antonio, welcome to our Sangha. How is your class tonight?
This is all nothing. Bless you, bless everyone here. Thank you for welcoming me. Yeah, this is all new to me. So.
This is a 51 to walk in on.
Yeah, keep coming back.
But thank you.
Yeah, keep coming. It'll make sense eventually.
Did you grasp any of it, or
Well, there's a lot to.
Yeah.
Yeah, lots of process.
You know. But thank you, for.
Tony insisted on bringing me tonight. I was tired and didn't want to come. I was feeling a bit before I came, but he wanted to bring me. So
Thank you, Antonio.
Thank you, Antonio.
Matthew will want to see me tonight.
I don't believe there's any such thing as an advanced teaching in the Dhamma. It's only that this really was required the context of this to really know how to apply it. So it's not really advanced, but you heard it mostly out of context. But if you continue to come, you'll understand this much more clearly. And there's a bunch of stuff on my website that can help you understand too. If you go to becoming-buddha.com, on the top menu, there's a link for new visitors, and that can get you pointed in the right direction if you want to do that. But if you just keep coming, you'll understand this. So I want to ask you, how was your meditation? Do you meditate, and are you interested in meditation? That's a tough question to ask. To say, if you really want to say no, it's going to be.
No, that's the best medicine in the world, and that'd be good to lower my blood pressure.
Yeah.
It's very, absolutely. I think more people need to be taking time and just being in the room, this is good medicine, the best medicine, and just talking but yeah, it just I guess people from different walks, there are different experiences. I'm not as articulate as everyone. I didn't do good in school, so it's hard for me to communicate, but I'm explaining as best I can.
Explained it well. when you come again, come just a little bit early, and I'll give some instruction on meditation, and then we can take it from there about if you want to develop a meditation practice. So I hope you join us again.
Thank you. Thank you. Bless.
Thank you. Vicky, good to see you.
Thank you very much. I'd like to comment on what Matthew said, but also I'd like to make an observation.
Sure.
You may recall, so like when I meditate, I count.
Mm-hmm.
And normally it's just like 1, 2, 3, 4. And then if my numbers start getting high, I go back to 1. Because then if the numbers are getting high, I'm like going too fast or I'm hung up on the numbers rather than the breath. So then I go back to a low number. But today, my breathing, initially, after I settled down, it was like 2 parts up and then 2 parts down.
Mm-hmm.
But then it even became 3 parts up and 3 parts down. So I don't know if I was like breathing more deeply or more, like a little deeper in the meditation, that I could separate the breath like that into 3, breathing in 3 segments and releasing 3 segments. I thought that was interesting. So
Yeah.
I kind of took that as getting a little deeper, like I could segregate my breath even,
Yeah.
But just touching on what Matthew said, yes, like I get everything, but then I try to apply it to real life, which is, or my life. Because I like to, and I don't know if this is part of the story, but I like to on things or happenings or occurrences. And like when we let all of that go, is life just so boring because there's no meaning to everything.
Yeah.
But then I realized like it could be taken in a good way as well, like not just part of the story, but in a way to advance you. Because like I believe in maybe serendipity is the word, like a tiny little thing will promote you to the next thing, which is like moving you along in a higher good path. So so like I don't know if attaching meaning to something that's not maybe taking you on that evolutionary path is part of the story, but then this is different. I don't know, but like I like to attach meaning to things, otherwise I feel like, if there's no meaning, you know what I mean?
Yep.
Is
What's
it
the
just
point?
empty? Is it just empty? I don't know.
Yeah, well, that's another misapplication of emptiness, but I won't get into that tonight. I think you heard me say even tonight that when people start getting the understanding of the implication of what these teachings are about, it feels like annihilation, or it feels like we're losing. What meaning will there be to life? And many, many people ask that question. So you're getting a good understanding of what this is. I can tell by the question itself. Whole life any human being has ever lived was the life of an awakened human being. Our lives can be as meaningful as the Buddha's life when we let go of the need to create meaning in all. Another way of saying that is creating an experience for me to have. Letting go of that need to have a meaningful life develops an incredibly meaningful life. Why? Because we're no longer stuck in getting what we think we need, or avoiding what we think might be coming down the pike, like that guy coming down the street. And we develop a well-concentrated and peaceful mind that is framed by the refined mindfulness of the Eightfold Path. So we're mindfully aware of our life as our life occurs. That's where true meaning lies, is being present for our own life. How other way could it be? Does that make sense to you?
Yes, it does. Thank you.
Yeah, well, it's such a very profound question, because for me to insist that my life be meaningful when my thinking is rooted in ignorance of Four Noble Truths, then every moment I have to be hyperkinetically engaged with I-making. This moment has to be meaningful, or there's no me in it. But when we can let go of that need for each moment to be meaningful to a self-referential ego self, then life is simply meaningful because it's unfolding and I'm present for it. I mean, I got to watch the word "on" because somebody's going to question me. We don't lose the self when we awaken. We don't vanish. We gain the ability to be mindfully present with life as life occurs. Another way of saying that is we're in that moment where the potential of each moment is inclined towards awakening, and we're no longer confused by the need for something else. Thank you for bringing that up. Frank, good to see you tonight.
Good to see you. Good to be here. I think I've had a couple, meditation is going great, but I've had a couple of rough days the last couple of days. It was like that veil that you were talking about, obscured meaning of the Four Noble Truths. And I had that monkey brain going on with the mind and the intellect and the consciousness swinging from one to the other. I have to remember that I've been through a lot in the last month.
Yeah.
Losing a brother is hard enough, and then being my partner, leaving 4 daughters behind. The whole month has just been filled with trying to fix things and make things right. And then, be there for other human beings, and consoling them and compassion and helping them get their life in order so that they can move forward. Just so much going on. And I'm still meditating through the whole process, and I have to remember that this practice that I've been doing really is keeping me in the here and the now. I don't really live in past or project the future, so I don't really have fear of anything, because fear always lived in my thoughts. They're always projecting forward, like the man in the hoodie, what's he gonna do? You know what I mean? But if I'm here with my breath, I'm not really fearing anything. And I don't know, it's just kind of like off the last couple of days, and I think uncomfortable with how things felt, because I am feeling things. My heart breaks for his daughters and for other people, So I'm feeling all these things, and I'm feeling a little uncomfortable sometimes. And now my mind is looking for things like seeking pleasure, avoiding pain, getting more of what I don't want, all that kind of stuff going on. And the continuity of that has been going on for so long that it feels like it's never going to end. And just being okay with it, really, and being mindful of those desires arising, whether they're for making things go away, accepting things that I can't change, and all that kind of stuff. It's just a lot, and I'm grateful. I feel blessed though, so thank you.
Thank you. Can I ask you a question? Because it kind of relates to what Vicky was talking about, and then the general. Through all of that, what you've been going through this past month, I would bet, I don't mean to put words in your mouth, that you feel that your life is more meaningful than it's ever been.
I have felt that. Yeah. I mean, before coming here, same scenario. I had wife, children, family business. I always wondered what the purpose and what my meaning was, or I could never really put my finger on it, but I was always living in past experiences or thinking about other things. I wasn't really living here.
Yeah.
I was living someplace else. And that's really been a cool journey, is like coming to the center and living here.
And your life is basically the same, despite some traumatic or big events. But the difference is you're in your life, you're living it. That's an awakened human being. Living with our life as our life occurs without the need for it to be any different than it is. It's amazing. Thank you, Frank.
I'm sorry to hear the loss of your brother.
Lorna.
Great talk, great discussion. It's just been a great night. So thank you all for coming. I think I'm beginning to see the meaning of the phrase, "Don't take life so personally." That's a phrase people have bandied around all your life. You kind of hear that, and I never really understood it. I'm beginning to see what it means. Don't take life so personally. And there's such a relief in that. So that's a good thing. I'm also thinking about you're not self-characteristic, and how pervasive it is in our thinking. For instance, my home is just an example of what I've gathered around in life to make myself feel comfortable in that home. And it's really an author that's sort of done that, really. It's not me, and that applies to what I wear and what I eat, and everything about me is it's come about that way.
Yeah.
It's all chosen to make me comfortable. So that's kind of the big thing.
It's the whole thing. So, thank you. I should make a comment though about that saying, "Don't take things too personal." Taken out of context, that could be a very cruel thing to say. Don't take it so personal. Within the Dhamma, it's kind of a key to not take things so personal. But it's not within the framework of the Dhamma. It's not meant to be dismissive. It's meant to be instructive. It's different. Thank you. Liz, good to see you.
Good to see you, good to be here. I just, there's something that Lorna said a while ago that has always stuck with me. And it's not only watching or feeling or being with something as it arises, but it's the backside of it too, and watching it as it passes away.
Yeah.
It's really an important thing that I learned, even in terms of settling myself down into my breath, watching the upside of the breath and the downside of the breath.
Yeah.
And then learning this, and then being in situations where you watch the sort of the front side and the back side of things. And it's really interesting, and it does sort of slow things down. If you can have that awareness to see how something presents itself, and maybe you don't react to it the same way you used to, sort of fall over the other side. It's like, not necessarily jumping in on a conversation because something came to your mind and or funny or, whatever it might have been, but to just sort of watch what happens if you don't. And the conversation continues and then it dies down. And so it's just, Lauren brought it up in relation to watching herself go through activities and how long she could stay in the moment. And then watching the thought arise. I think that's what this.
Rising and passing away.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I just found that really helpful. And then the other thing is the way, and you'll get into it in the next talk, but the way you can break the chain of the clinging aggregates. Makes it all very hopeful and attainable.
Yeah.
So that's all I have.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, it certainly is. The Buddha taught a Dhamma for any human being that engaged with it could develop it. Another key to all of this is recognizing the impermanence of all things. And we do that directly by recognizing the arising and passing away. And we can do that with any type of phenomena that's arising. The meditation method that the Buddha taught and that we use is specifically geared towards recognizing impermanence, isn't it? We recognize by staying with the breath, the arising and the passing away of our own breath. Related to the arising and passing away of our thoughts. It's directly related to the arising and passing away of all impermanent things. That's the last instruction I give for the last 5 minutes. If something is reoccurring, recognize the impermanence of it. Because no matter how continual it is, it's impermanent. Everything is. And if we can stay with something, and this is a good exercise to use just in our life, just as things are occurring, be mindful of the passing away of whatever it is, whatever's coming up in our life. Stay with the passing away of it, even if it's just a car approaching or a person approaching you. Notice the arising and the passing away of the car. Notice the arising and passing away of a conversation. Some people don't let a conversation pass away, do they? We keep it going. Or anything, the arising and passing away of that nice piece of chocolate cake. Enjoy the end of it. Enjoy the last bite as much as the first bite. Then you'll be involved in your life. Lorna, you had a question?
Yeah, just following on what Liz was saying, that I've noticed that the passing away is the joyful side, because that's the opening to the next arising. And without following the passing away, you don't enjoy the next arising, and that's life. And that's
that's
life.
that's
I
great.
have that in my office. I have that statement like that in my office. It says every new beginning follows another's passing, but it's written in such a positive way.
Yes.
You know, that one door closes and another opens.
The passing away is joyful.
And being stuck in the story
Opportunity.
continues that continuity of the story. We don't recognize it. It's occurring all the time.
Yeah.
That's why did the Buddha have to point it out? Because we don't recognize it. Because that aspect of ignorance to ignore what's occurring. I want to maintain the story. I don't want to recognize the impermanence of even that last thought that I had. Because
That's really
that's me.
interesting, because that's why that explains why you cling to something. You never see the backside of it. You just support the arising.
But you never let it go.
You never let it
You don't watch
fall
it.
over the.
We even do that with goodbye.
So change is so uncertain.
Right. Exactly.
Change is uncertain.
Yes.
It's certain.
It's uncertain because we can't establish a me in it until it's happened.
Right.
But we try to by projecting, by worry, by anxiety. We do it all the time. And is it worry is just the front end, and it's a false front end of something arising. Might not even happen.
Exactly.
But we engage in it all the time, don't we? We don't want to get into when we create scenarios about what might happen, about the guy walking down the street, we don't go to the passing away that this is nothing. Or even recognizing that at some point the guy's going to pass me. And we stay with the arising of it, and we miss the passing of it. Stay with this, because the story, the self is established in that. When Khandana awakened in the Buddha's first teaching, it's because he understood this at such a profound level. All conditioned things that arise are subject to cessation. Lao Tzu said, when you recognize the impermanence of all things, you'll let go of everything. Especially self-referential thoughts. Why would I hold on to it? Why would I keep creating? Why would I keep dragging this story around from one moment to the next? It hasn't done me well, but yet I'll keep doing it. Frank or Lorna had it?
Yeah, I was just going to say, like that's really good news for people, or for me, who had a lot of attachments to things that I thought would cause my happiness. So the passing away of all of those things pass away. Happiness is always with you. So those things really don't cause happiness.
Yeah, unless it's conditioned, unless you place conditions on your happiness.
Well, that's what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
That's the passing away.
Yep. And how, it's just in a logical sense. If you're not attached to anything being a certain way, what has to follow? Happiness, peace.
Freedom.
Yeah. It's when you realize that at its core, at its essence, what the Buddha awakened to is so obvious. But that's what gave him the understanding of it takes ignorance to continue something like that, doesn't it? We have to have an ongoing strategy to continue ignorance, or it all falls apart. We'll get to that next week if I ever shut up this week. Bonnie, good to see you.
I'm just that it is obvious, but the clinging to the fabrications and fabrication, and knowing I know what I need to do, but so I think I can cling less I don't cling as long.
Yep.
Because I can see it all, I see it, but, you know, it's like a muscle, your muscles do it automatically. The witness tries to, for me, to have a witness, so, looking, so that I can make different choices. So just, when I get there, being quicker, but,
Yeah. And
do it in a compassionate way.
yes, it has to be. You have to be very gentle, very compassionate with yourself and those around you, and recognize the process as it unfolds. That's important. Thank you. There was an announcement. I can't think of what it is. Oh, our retreat's coming up in less than 2 months. If you're going, please sign up. It's going to be based on all the stuff we talked about. That's it. We'll finish with metta, as we always do. So find your relaxed meditative posture, and gently close your eyes and gently close your mouth. And take a moment to become aware of the sensation of breathing in your body, and let that mindfulness of your breath cease any distracting thoughts to the past or to the future, or that have arisen from our talk tonight. And these are the Buddha's words on metta from the Karaniya Metta Sutta. This is what should be done by one who is skilled in goodness and who knows the path of peace. Let them be able and upright, straightforward and gentle in speech, humble and not conceited, contented and easily satisfied, unburdened with duties and frugal in their ways, peaceful and calm and wise and skillful, not proud or demanding in nature. Let them not do the slightest thing that the wise would later reprove. Wishing in gladness and in safety, may all beings be at ease. Whatever living beings there may be, whether they are weak or strong, omitting none, the great or the mighty, medium, short, or small, the seen and the unseen, those living near and far away, those born and to be born, may all beings be at ease. Let none deceive another or despise any being in any state. Let none through anger or ill will wish harm upon another. Even as a mother protects with her life her child, her only child, so with a boundless heart should one cherish all living beings. Kindness over the entire world, spreading upwards to the skies and downwards to the depths, outwards and unbounded, freed from hatred and ill will. Whether standing or walking, seated or lying down, free from drowsiness, one should sustain this recollection. This is said to be the sublime abiding. By not holding to fixed views, the pure-hearted one, having clarity of vision, being freed from all sense desires, is not born again into this world. Thank you all for a wonderful class. Peace. The one thing I wanted to say is, if you're going on a retreat, please, and you want to send me a check at some point, please use the registration form, because that solves the problem of me keeping 2 lists. With my list, I don't have to keep one list now. So
you just register online.
That's all. Yeah.
No matter how you pay.
Thank you. Liz, did you have a question?